experts. That, plus Britain and the space race, the latest on political nerves ahead of the budget, and a fresh perspective on what young Britons around the country really think about politics and much else. It has been a very lively start to the week, so join me please after the news.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 6 o'clock, Donald Trump is threatening to sue the BBC for $1 billion if it doesn't remove a selectively edited speech at the centre of a major backlash. The footage from a panorama programme appears to show the US president as inciting violence. The broadcaster has apologised, admitting the content was misleading, but its chairman denies there's a systemic bias. Joshua Rosenberg is a former legal correspondent at the BBC.
My view is that the BBC is very likely to consider the best thing to do is to settle, to apologise, to offer compensation, perhaps to charity, and hope that President Trump will therefore not take legal action.
Simon Marks is LBC's correspondent in Washington.
For the White House, this is a big win. We heard from President Trump last week that he considers the BBC to be 100% fake news.
An appeals court in Paris has released former French President Nicolas Sarkozy from prison and placed him under judicial supervision. He served less than 3 weeks of a 5-year sentence after being convicted of criminal conspiracy to finance his 2007 election campaign. It's reported transgender women could be banned from all female categories at the Olympics. The measure could be introduced for the Games in LA in 2028, but it's understood a decision has not yet been made. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 105 points at 97.87. The pound buys $1.32 and €1.14. The LBC weather: rain in the east tonight and again later on in the west, a low of 1 degree. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Tim Humphrey.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening, and all fall down. The departure of the BBC's Director General and its Head of News have been followed this afternoon by an extraordinary international kicking for Britain's biggest news organisation. Donald Trump's White House has sent a letter suggesting he might sue the BBC for editing his speech misleadingly, what he called false, defamatory, disparaging, misleading and inflammatory statements about him. He wants not less than $1 billion in damages. Israel's foreign ministry said Tim Davies' resignation underscored deep-seated bias on its coverage of Israel. And the Russian Foreign Ministry attacked the BBC as beyond redemption, saying it had fabricated its coverage of events in Ukraine. Washington, Moscow and Tel Aviv. Now, inside the BBC, they used to say that if you're being attacked from both sides, you must be getting something right. Well, I guess the folks there will be thrilled tonight. The BBC can be completely infuriating. And I say that as a watcher, a listener, and somebody who used to work there. But it's infuriating in the way that an old eccentric uncle who has been sitting in the corner of the room in stained corduroys for your entire life could be infuriating. In other words, for goodness sake, but also, I can't imagine life without it. But we are living, my friends, in wild times. Unless the NHS shapes up, we could lose that within a few years. The Royals are on the downward path towards who cares anymore. And if Reform wins the next election, which the polls say is likely, then I suspect we can kiss goodbye to the BBC. Nigel Farage sounded furious about it earlier on today, accusing the BBC of election interference. Would he keep the licence fee? Would he keep the Royal Charter? I put it to you that this country would feel very different if we lost the organisation that has helped shape Britain's sense of itself for more than 100 years. A lot of the problem is the BBC's fault. The self-righteous posturing, the flabby news programmes and the regular scandals. For what it's worth, I think the editing of Donald Trump's speech was a disgrace. But I wouldn't want to lose the BBC any more than I would want to gently lead a smelly but familiar elderly relative into the backyard and do him in. Right now, the BBC has to find a brilliant new leader. That will not be easy because it's a horrible job. Let's talk first to somebody who was a staple of BBC broadcasting for years, Jonathan Dimbleby, broadcaster and historian, a presenter of the programme Any Questions. Jonathan, great to have you on the show tonight. I guess let's start off with what you consider the depth of the hole the BBC might be in. I referred there to, a possible future government. This does feel like a more fragile situation than the BBC has faced before.
I think it is a hole. I'm not sure how deep it is. I think if you've got a combination of Netanyahu, Putin, and Trump denouncing the BBC, there must be something quite good about it. And I think that the one salvation of the BBC will be that as we kind of gain a little bit more perspective, people will recognise that it is actually the most trusted and impartial broadcasting institution in the world that will not stop the likes of Nigel Farage and actually those parts of the Conservative Party that are tilting to the right, want very sharply to the right, so that a lot of Tories actually think that it's deserted them, it's no longer their party, that they won't stop them having a serious go. And you rightly touch on the problem of the Charter and the renewal, the Constitution of the BBC. And I think the thing that worries me greatly is that Tim Davie, whom I confess is a good friend and who I think is, I'm really sad that he's felt he had to go under all the psychological and professional pressures, that he is the one person who would have been there to drive the BBC towards an outcome which would suit broadcasting and suit the public. And I think the BBC is the weaker for as long as it can't find an adequate replacement for him.
Well, it's a very hard job to fill for reasons we've just discussed. But also some people are saying it could take months, maybe even a year to fill that job. How serious is it for the BBC to have no Director General, but also no Editor-in-Chief, because the two jobs come together for a lengthy period of time?
It could hardly be at a worst moment. You relied on exactly the thought, because it is the Director General who deals principally with government, with the Department of Culture, and with Number 10 as well, about the framework which will be established. Now, mercifully, despite the Culture Secretary's rather lukewarm support for Davie over the previous months and years, Number 10 clearly believes in the BBC and believes that it ought to be sustained. Now, what mechanism they would wish to have, whether it should be partially funded by council tax, whether it should be funded by other means, whether it should be a service you pay for, whatever it is, the only person that I know who is fully equipped, given his experience and his knowledge and his skill, is Tim Davie. So yes, it's a very, very big problem for the BBC, and I don't see any easy way out of it at the moment.
That being the case, what about sort of internal reorganisation and internal management? Because the worst problems for the BBC, there's problems with cooking programmes, there's problems with Strictly Come Dancing, you name it, but the really big ones are all inside news and current affairs. And it certainly seems to me that, as it were, the management spine hasn't been tough enough and strong enough. There hasn't been enough of a grip of news and current affairs for a while.
I think that you're absolutely right. I mean, look at the thousands, tens of thousands of hours that go out from news, current affairs, documentaries. Very important programmes that are very closely scrutinised because it's the BBC. I have an anxiety in the way in which it appears, and I don't know. It appears that trans issues, which are highly controversial, have allegedly been driven too much by young people who have very strong ideological commitment about it or personal views about it, and they haven't left those views at the door. And management should have been very much tougher, it seems to me, to make sure that you bear in mind, absolutely, on these really important social, psychological issues, to bear in mind, most of all, the range of feelings there are on an issue like it. It's not a question of easy truth. insofar as you're dealing with international affairs or indeed political affairs, the task is not to be swayed. You need to hear from all views, of course, but the editorial judgment is not to be persuaded by those shifting sands. Is in a world that is so dominated by social media, by every other means of rivalrous communication, that not to be shifted. And it's very tempting to be shifted unless you are very robust and very strong to be shifted, most of all, and not least at least, by newspapers who are not very widely trusted and have a really big commercial agenda to do down the BBC on the one hand, and ideologues on the other, who are highly articulate on the right of the spectrum, peddling populist arguments about the BBC. It's very difficult to hold the line, and it takes tough leadership.
That's absolutely right. Your father, if I may say, was in many ways the voice of the BBC speaking to the nation in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War and the late Queen's coronation and all of that. What do you think Britain would be like without the BBC if it actually had to go completely?
I think we would not realise what we had done until it was too late. I'm not just leave aside all the entertainment programmes that are hugely successful, Traitors, Celebrity, Come Dancing, all the rest. They could conceivably be done elsewhere, but I think they are part of an attitude towards serving the public that is very important. What is crucial is that without the balance, the integrity, the urge for fairness and accuracy, which you see represented in the most prominent of our reporters who take Israel, which has been, Netanyahu's been banging on. Well, he would, wouldn't he? Through his spokespeople. Someone like Jeremy Bowen, for instance, distinguished broadcaster, under great pressure from all round, steers that path immaculately. And I think that's the kind of thing we might lose if it was not there. And I think it would be disastrous.
Jonathan, if you're looking for an argument with me about Jeremy Bowen, you're not going to get one. Thank you very, very much indeed for talking to LBC tonight. And now to somebody who has a wealth of experience putting together exactly the kind of political coverage behind the scenes we've been talking about. Dorothy Byrne, who is Head of News and Current Affairs at Channel 4. Dorothy, thank you so much for joining us tonight. After my conversation there with Jonathan Dimbleby, there's something that occurs to me which is quite serious, which is that the BBC has always seen itself as the kind of public square in which Britain can talk in a kind of civilised and reasonable way to each other. But perhaps we are so divided as a society now, whether it's around the trans issues that Jonathan was talking about, or Israel and Gaza, or our own imperial history, or whatever it is, that kind of civilised conversation is not, frankly, what people want.
I don't agree with the implications that you are drawing from current matters. I think that there is still massive evidence that what people want is accurate, fair, and duly impartial journalism. And in many ways, they want it even more, and they need it even more in a divided society. And that's why when the BBC does make a mistake, it's so very important that it should admit that it's made a mistake in order to keep the public trust. But also, I have to say, in order to keep the confidence of its own journalists. I have been thinking today, what must it be like for the journalists in the US who have to go and sit in White House press conferences fearing some sarcastic attack because their own organisation made a very basic mistake, which maybe anybody could have made, and failed to apologise. Yeah,
that's a very good point. Can I ask you, however, about this word mistake, which I hear a lot about the Panorama editing moment? Because, like me, I'm sure you have spent more hours than you care to remember sitting in hot edit suites with kind of raw footage in front of you and thinking, how do I get the maximum punch, the maximum impact from this? And, of course, editing is one way you do that. But I don't think you, and I don't think I would ever never have spliced together different bits of a speech in a way that suggests to the viewer there has been no editing. In other words, we'd have a little flash or a reaction shot, or we'd say 20 minutes later he said this, or something like that, to indicate that you'd put two things together. And I don't think that's a mistake. I think that was a deliberate and really serious piece of misrepresentation.
You might do that if it wasn't such a controversial speech. I find it extraordinary that the two pieces, which were a long way apart, were put together. My understanding is actually that the quite a number of BBC executives involved did not, in fact, know that there was an edit there.
Yeah. And that in itself is a bit odd, Dorothy. Back in your Channel 4 days, you would have expected, presumably, the producer of a documentary like that to come to you and talk to you about it, and you would have known if there had been a potentially controversial edit.
Yeah, and the other thing, to be honest, that I would have done, and I'm not just saying this, Donald Trump is the most powerful man in the world, and this was probably the biggest speech made anywhere in the past 5 years. You know, this is a really huge speech. So I think it's not just the matter of the edit. I think if you were going to say, we're just going to use this little clip of the speech, you'd have said, I want somebody very senior to look at that and go, is just using that one little clip a misleading representation of the speech? And if they had done that, they would have discovered there was an edit.
Yeah.
So they didn't do that either.
They didn't. And they're paying one heck of a price for it. Dorothy Byrne, thank you very much for talking to me tonight. Now, the royal family, the NHS, the BBC, indeed, the entire British government seems to be in turmoil at the moment. What impact will it have on our society if one or more of these institutions were to collapse? Why are all of the staples of society seemingly in flux? To discuss that, the historian and former Daily Telegraph editor, foreign correspondent for the BBC as well, Sir Max Hastings, is with me. Sir Max, this is a grim, grim day for the BBC.
I couldn't agree more. That it does make me feel pretty sick that even though the BBC's made huge mistakes, to see the hunting pack of right-wing newspapers, which are themselves guilty of consistent daily bias on all manner of issues, starting with the Middle East, which Jonathan Dimbleby so eloquently spoke about, weighing into the BBC, tearing at the BBC's vitals. If we lose the BBC, gosh, we're going to be sorry. And it's always a question of trying to think the virtues of the Beeb still seem to vastly outweigh its shortcomings. And an awful lot of people seem in danger of forgetting that at the moment. And people like Jonathan and you and I and all the rest of it, I think we have to keep saying, just think of all the good stuff the Beeb does. But I'm afraid there is, you just mentioned all the other institutions that are in trouble at the moment. And I'm afraid this anti-institutional bias, this tearing down, which of course is led by the President of the United States, is pretty sick-making, hearing him, who's a sort of standard bearer for mendacity, announcing on the television tonight that he wants to sue the BBC, that Donald Trump is the archetypal destroyer. And in a way, he's symbolic of an awful lot of stuff that's going on in the world. And again, we should be asking ourselves, I think, are we or are we not a better society with this or that institution, regardless of its failings? And gosh, it's difficult to keep any sense of balance, that all the time that we are being driven to greater and greater depths of extremism.
There seems to be an almost gleeful tearing down of authority in all directions. I've been trying to imagine to myself, to think, if I could have rolled over in bed and woke up one morning and the BBC had literally disappeared from the landscape, how different would Britain feel? What do you think?
I don't think on the first day that they'd realise what they're lost. One of the problems at the moment, not a lot of thinking is going on, that everybody is so dug into social media that there's so little incentive to think, that what we're seeing, if one wants to, rather pompous phrase to use, but the age of the Enlightenment, which happened in the 18th century, and which taught people that the way you reach decisions is not through religion or through superstition. It's through a rational examination of evidence. An awful lot of much cleverer people than me, much wiser people than me, have been saying lately what we're seeing is an attempt by all sorts of people, starting with Donald Trump, but many of our own politicians, to undo the age of the Enlightenment, to go back to this business of the attacks on institutions, the attacks on reason. And in the end, all we can really do, and it does seem enormously important, is we've got to try and constantly keep appealing for people to think before they act, to think before they vote, to think before they take up drastic positions. But gosh, it's difficult to do that at the moment.
Just returning to the BBC one final time, Max, do you think there's a danger of it going after too many audiences that are not, as it were, core audiences? Let's do all these different kinds of audience, super serve people who are basically interested in celebrity news or cooking or whatever, and forget that the spine, the purpose of the BBC is really news and current affairs?
I think there is a great danger of that. I never forget back in the late 1990s when my close friend Christopher Blair was chairman of the BBC. And I said to him rather arrogantly, if you like, I said, you know, Christopher, I've had all the jobs I could possibly want, but I would love to have been Director General of the BBC because I think I'd have done it better than some of the incumbents. And Christopher said, you're completely wrong. A, you'd have hated it. You would have got bored with all the 5-hour meetings. And B, he said, you think that it's a super editor function. Actually, nowadays, Director General of the BBC spend most of their time in long meetings to discuss whether the corporation employs any enough disabled black people. Well, now, I think some of us would feel very strongly what the BBC needs to get back to is being run by editor figures and having people in the background who attend the 5-hour meetings to discuss diversity and, God help us, gender.
Here. Max Hastings, thank you very, very much indeed for talking to me tonight. The Chancellor is still grappling with breaking her manifesto pledges on tax and the budget. We're going to speak to a Labour MP who's only just been welcomed back into the party after rebelling, but she is not mincing her words about the trouble the Chancellor is in. The time now, 6:21.
Weekdays from 7 a.m.
Why is there delay?
Straight to the point.
This government is unravelling everywhere you look.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
How can that make sense to anyone?
Listen on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app. Download it now from your app store. LBC.
Mickey could try to sell his car privately. Or get it sold today with We Buy Any Car. He could spend days on end trying to sell to a bunch of time wasters. Or sell in a flash and head to the fun fair with the kids. Proper gutted. Or proper impressed. To get a quote in 30 seconds, enter your reg number now at WeBuyAnyCar.com.
How's the business going? We're busier than ever, but struggling to get the staff we need. Recruiting can be such a distraction. We gave Job Centre Plus a try, and they've really helped us out. Really? Yeah, it was dead easy. We got our own employer advisor, Julie, who helped advertise our jobs, shortlisted candidates for us, and let us interview at the Job Centre. We've hired some great people, and Job Centre Plus really took the hassle out of it, and there was no fee.
Brilliant. That's straight on my to-do list.
Find out more at business.gov.uk/recruit. Eligibility criteria apply.
Train to Cambridge and then all aboard the paddleboards. A little bit different, should be fun. Or wobbly, or wet. The wetsuit's a good look on you, Steve. Oh, actually, this is very relaxed. Georgie's up the River Cam without a paddle. Train home, that was such a laugh. I think I might even have a new hobby. Download the Thameslink Railway app to book tickets and save a third off group travel on off-peak journeys. Thameslink Railway, where every stop is a story.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:23. Now, just perhaps a little over 2 weeks out, the shape of the budget is in fact becoming clearer. Not just the likelihood of Labour breaking the manifesto promises to raising income tax, but also the end of the 2-child benefit cap, which has condemned so many families to poverty. So how are Labour MPs balancing it all out as the stories continue to leak out of the Treasury? I spoke a little bit earlier to Rachael, one of the 4 Labour rebels who's just got the party whip back, asking how did she feel about that?
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to be a Labour and Co-op MP once again, but of course it was only a precautionary suspension pending an investigation. There was no investigation, so having the whip back means the world to me because I am Labour to the core. So I will continue to stand up for my constituents and ensure that we really put that focus on the issues which really do matter across the country.
In practical terms, in terms of how you handle daily and weekly life, does it mean any change?
I have to say it doesn't, because those values are embedded deep within me. And of course, the issues don't change in my constituency. But what it will ensure is that I am talking with even more fervour to ministers about ensuring we get the next 3.5 years absolutely right for the country.
You talk about values there, which leads us neatly on to the forthcoming budget. And very strong indications, I've had them myself, from the Chancellor, that she does intend to raise income tax, breaking the manifesto pledge, perhaps by 2p in the pound. Now, I can see an economic case for that, but politically it's extremely dangerous. What's your view?
I think it's really important to honour a manifesto because that's about trust. And I think, obviously, we don't know what's in the budget, but I do think it's really important that we have a budget which is able to provide stability for the economy as well. And of course, the volatility we've seen over recent years has left the economy in a very fragile state. So building that stability is important. But what I would say to the Chancellor is that we need to look at wealth as well. And I think it is time that we not only looked at income, but recognise that those people who have the most generate most of that wealth from things like their assets, their investments and property. And it's time that we equalised the pressure being placed on them as opposed to it coming from workers' pockets. So I trust that the proportionate approach will be taken.
So this is very interesting. If she broke the manifesto pledge, you say she shouldn't, and raised income tax and said that was the reason why she didn't have to, for instance, cut welfare spending. But if she hadn't done it, she'd have to cut welfare spending. You still say don't make those tax changes, even if it means tighter controls on spending.
Well, let's look at the figures. If you had a wealth tax on assets over £10 million at 2%, you bring 24 billion into the economy. Yet we're talking about welfare spending on eradicating child poverty at just £3.6 billion. Equalised capital gain tax, that's another £14 billion coming into the economy. So there are measures that could be taken which will protect the poorest in our society, protect working people, but ensure those people with excess wealth pay their fair share. And you could hypothecate it so that there is a moral obligation behind those individuals who will be paying more into the system.
That's, again, very interesting. So when Rachel Reeves told me that she was going to be a Labour Chancellor and this was going to be a Labour budget, that's the kind of thing that you hope she meant.
Well, absolutely. Progressive economies are the ones that deliver for the whole of society, and that's what we need to see. But I would also encourage the Chancellor to think about radical devolution of that resource as well. We know that a pound spent in Westminster doesn't stretch as far as a pound spent in locality. And indeed, if we think about third sector providers, charities, they're able to stretch that money even further. So I think we've got to think about where that money is held, where it is spent, and how it can really work to bring the benefit to our communities.
Would you like to see radical changes, therefore, to council tax? Because famously, quite expensive houses in central London pay less council tax than terraced houses in parts of the north of England. And equalising that and ensuring that local authorities in the north and the Midlands had more money to spend would be a huge shift in the country.
Well, I do think we should look at council tax again. It's a regressive policy, and of course it favours the south, not the north. And we know that many communities in the north are battling with so much neglect over many years, and particularly if we look at issues about investment in housing, investment in communities, we're going to be talking about special educational needs soon, and we need to see that real shift in resource. So I do welcome any discussions to talk about more progressive approaches to having that local income coming into authorities, which can really make a difference, build those partnerships and transform people's lives.
So we've talked a bit about taxation. Let's turn to the other side, spending. Lots and lots of pressures on spending, as we know, but very strong indications earlier today that the Chancellor intends to raise the two-child benefits cap, not just a little bit, but for everybody.
Well, we know that 4.5 million children are living in poverty, and tonight 180,000 children will be in temporary accommodation. So it's the right and the moral thing to do is to remove the two-child limit and also the welfare cap, because there's no point lifting the limit to then be capped and not being able to get more resources into your family income. So it's really important they're done in parallel to ensure that families have got sufficiency. It's wrong that families, whether by adopting more children, you just denied that money, or indeed you've got a larger family, to have that extra £3,500 to be able to invest in the future is absolutely right for a family. And I really urge the Chancellor to follow through on the strong indications she's given today to do so.
Well, that would certainly be widely welcomed, particularly on the left of the party, but generally, I think, across the party. Let me circle back to where we started, Rachael, which is that possibility of breaking the manifesto promise, because that was a promise made, as it were, by Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves on behalf of people like you. Everybody who stood as a Labour candidate and became elected as a Labour MP stood on that manifesto. What do you think it would mean for you personally and your colleagues to break that promise?
Well, I think it's about the communities that voted for that manifesto, and I think there will be a question about trust in a government. They will obviously understand that the economy is in a worse state than expected, but of course what they would expect is that other savings are made. For instance, we're hearing about talk of ID cards, also not in the manifesto. Perhaps don't spend on things like that and instead invest that money on public services, bring the reforms that we need. So I think it's really important that the Chancellor does adhere to the manifesto in her budget and ensure that it does work hard to deliver the best spend on every pound within it.
And if she doesn't, is her position tenable?
Well, I think we have to really wait and see what the Chancellor does on the 26th of November. But I do think she needs to weigh up the issue of public trust as well as competence within the economy, of which I know she is eager to bring.
Interesting that you can't say to me, of course it is, Andrew. In the same spirit, if that manifesto pledge was broken, do you think Labour MPs would actually vote that through the House of Commons?
Well, I think there will be much discussion in the Parliamentary Labour Party if the manifesto wasn't adhered to, and we would have to have real sound reason to understand why that couldn't be so. Obviously, I do understand the pressures, and being able to deliver for people in our communities is important, but it's really important that working people who at the moment are stretched to the limit with the cost of living aren't paying more into the system. So we've got to protect them. That's an absolute red line.
Rachael Maskell, thank you very much for talking to LBC tonight.
Thank you.
The leader of the free world is seeking to sue the BBC for an enormous $1 billion after the error at the heart of the broadcasters' crisis. Is the end of the BBC hoving into sight? The time now, 6:31, and here's Tim Humphrey with your news headlines.
Donald Trump is threatening to sue the BBC for $1 billion if it doesn't remove material selectively edited for a panorama programme. The broadcaster has apologised for the content and admitted it was misleading. A second migrant deported to France under the government's one-in, one-out deal has returned to the UK on a small boat. The Home Office says the man will be sent back as soon as possible. Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy has arrived home after being released from prison. He'll now face judicial supervision after serving less than 3 weeks of a 5-year sentence for criminal conspiracy. The LBC weather: rain in the east tonight and later on in the west, a low of 1 degree.
On the latest episode of The Newsagents.
Is Donald Trump really responsible for bringing down the BBC Director General and the head of news? Or is there something much more murky going on within New Broadcasting House?
Get the latest episode of The Newsagents with Emily Maitlis, John Sopel and Lewis Goodall. Listen or watch on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app.
If you bought a home on a holiday park in the UK, what you thought you were getting may not be what you ended up with. From unexpected site fee increases, running costs, a huge depreciation in value, many owners feel they've been missold. If you think this might be you, holidayparkadvicecentre.co.uk could help you receive the compensation you're entitled to. Text ASSIST to 78900 to find out more. That's ASSIST to 78900.
At TfL, we're making tube journeys faster in the future, with signalling improvements underway on the Circle, District, Hammersmith and City and Metropolitan lines. And there's also the Elizabeth line, already giving you fast journeys across central London. That is how we're making the greener way to travel brighter for everyone. Search TfL Improvement Plan. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters. Elizabeth Line is fast compared to other TfL modes, greener than total estimated petrol and diesel car emissions.
Breakfast is the most important meal of the day, followed by 11s, brunch, lunch or dinner, then tea or dinner, or supper, depending where you're from. Look, can we at least agree that breakfast is the most important meal of the day? That's why Warburton's, the family bakers, teamed up with organisations like Magic Breakfast to donate millions of breakfasts this year to schools in the UK. Good stuff. It's baked in at Warburton's. To find out more, search Warburton's Good Stuff.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:34. Let's return now to the turmoil the BBC finds itself in, and one of the prevailing narratives that's emerged over the day is that there may have been a board-level coup to remove the Director General, Tim Davie. Well, I put that theory to a man who operated at the heart of the state broadcaster for a long time, Mark Damazer, former controller of both BBC Radio 4 and also deputy editor of BBC News, and he's still got many close ties to people in management positions. So did he think there was anything in the coup theory?
I doubt that's the right way of interpreting this. A coup would imply that a group of like-minded people got together in a back room, possibly including outsiders, politicians and commentators and so on, and decided that they wanted to remove the head of news and the head of the BBC, the Director General, and that they were going to follow a stratagem to do that, and it was all concerted and neatly worked out, and they've got what they wanted. So that's the notion of an organised coup. That's a very different question from whether everybody on the board fully understood the stakes here and whether enough was done to try and ensure that Tim Davie stayed on, which is what I wished would have happened. But I doubt very much that there's been this kind of organised, brilliantly plotted mastermind which has led to the demise of these two executives.
Tim Davie had endured weeks and months of incredible pressure. Do you think in the end it's the intolerable business of being Director General, being kind of the nation's whipping boy, that meant he'd had enough and he wanted to go?
I think that's overwhelmingly likely to be the case. And you have to ask yourself now about this job and whether the constant wave after wave hitting you in the chest. I don't know that it's a deliberate strategy to make the job undoable and destroy the BBC, but what I do know is that the relentlessness of it and the disproportion of it and the irrationality of at least some of it, I'm not saying all of it, but some of it, when it's combined with regularity, velocity and intensity of a news cycle and the social media offshoots of that news cycle, make the job unbelievably difficult. And I know Tim pretty well, and he's a tough-minded individual. And the fact that after 5 years, even though the board wanted him to stay on, we now learn that Tim felt that enough was enough, speaks volumes for what he had to endure. And, okay, he was getting a decent salary, no question, and the BBC has to be accountable, no question. And it's quite right that he goes to Parliament often, no question. But this constant sense of one particular error being made, and, you know, there are errors, let's talk about it, fine, they're errors, but at each point, it's surrounded by an atmosphere of end-of-the-worldness. You know, whatever the error might be, you know, whether it's Trump, unquestionably a mistake, and, you know, a significant mistake, obviously shouldn't have happened, or the wretched business at Glastonbury, really, you know, a mistake, no question about it. The Gaza documentary earlier in the year, more complicated, but okay, mistakes made. But each of them is propelled forward into being a 5-act opera. And there are questions to be asked, and yes, we need to find out who made the decisions. It's all perfectly proper, but the thunderous noise that surrounds each of these, as if it was the hallmark of the BBC, that it blundered around from mistake to mistake, and all the good things that happen, of which there are really a great many every day, just happen by accident. I mean, they're not there because anybody's any good. They're sort of random particles that create the BBC. And, you know, we should be very, very amazed that the BBC can do good stuff, because if you read the kind of noise around the BBC and listen to it, the BBC is obviously full of noodleheads who know nothing. Well, it's not full of noodleheads who know nothing. They're really quite good people most of the time, and they make a lot of very good decisions.
And speaking of noodleheads, I'd like your reaction, Mark, to the extraordinary international attacks on the BBC we've seen this afternoon. Donald Trump's White House saying that it's dishonest and dishonourable and threatening legal action. We've had the Kremlin weighing in and saying the BBC is disgraceful and its coverage of Ukraine was disgraceful. We've had the Israeli government in Tel Aviv weighing in, saying much the same thing about Gaza.
Well, I don't celebrate any of those developments. I think the BBC's worldwide standing is a major asset both for the BBC and, as it happens, for the UK. And so the extent to which its reputation has been damaged by all of this is...
So it's a blow for all of us, really.
It's a blow for all of us. Now, the question is whether the BBC will recover from it, and also to make it clear that the fact that these three particular governments are complaining does not mean that these three particular governments, in a general sense, are right. I mean, Trump, fine. There was a mistake in a documentary about him. Please don't run away with the notion that Trump's behaviour on January the 6th, 2021, which was part of the focus of this panorama, makes him the Mahatma Gandhi of the modern world, and that his reputation has been trashed accordingly. The BBC made a bad mistake. They should have apologised for it much earlier. Game, set and match, fine. But, Trump's reputation behaving as if this documentary had made this fine, upstanding champion of democracy, as evinced by his performance on January the 6th, and had turned him into something completely different. That's just obviously not what that story is about. Mistake was made. It's damaged our reputation, certainly in part of America, bad thing. Israel is very complicated. The Israeli government and lots of pro-Israel groups in the UK have felt for a long time that the BBC is being unfair. I understand that debate and its coordinates. I don't agree with their overall judgment. And Putin, well, how can I put it? I mean, Putin will say what he will say. I take his assessments of the BBC's impartiality, if I may say so, with quite a large grain of salt. Make that not a grain, make that a whole barrelful.
A barrelful, very good. Final area of conversation, Mark. What next? I mean, it's clear that the BBC, to get out of this, requires an extraordinary person to come in as leader. Somebody with very, very good managerial skills, a great sense of grip, fantastic personal resilience, eloquence, ability to deal with a storm of criticism, all of that. It's going to be very, very hard in the circumstances to find such a person.
So I think it's a great worry. I think, I've known quite a few of the Director Generals, some of them really rather well. I could make a case for all of them. It is a very, very tough job. I'm not denying that they don't get status out of it and that they don't get well paid and all the rest of it. I do worry now about whether a field will present themselves, because if you know that vilification and sacking is certain at the point at which you start, there are only so many number of centre court tickets which mitigate. You can go in with a high duty and a sense of purpose. I'm absolutely convinced. I know him well enough to say that definitely applies to Tim Davie. Absolutely. It's a very significant salary. There is more money to be made elsewhere. It's a significant salary. But if you really know that at the end of it, it's 90% certain you're going to get trashed and vilified for mistakes which may not be your direct responsibility, where you've tried honourably to clear them up, sometimes not successfully, but where the threshold is so low for public tolerance and acceptance, and the physical wear and tear of it. I mean, it's a big organisation and it's pumping out stuff 24/7. And if you're responsible for all of it and you're surrounded by this clatter, thunder, din, disproportionate, and in my view, kind of Wagnerian unreasonableness at times, then Wagnerian in the sense of the scale, nothing to do with Wagner, then, it ends up being close to undoable, and very, very good people, I'm sure there are some out there, very, very good people won't throw their hat into the ring. So we're all diminished because the BBC matters, because we all own it, and it's a very, very big part of national public life.
Mark Damazer, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
It's a pleasure, Andrew. It's a pleasure.
What do younger people in Britain, including all of those getting the vote for the first time, really think and really want? What are their priorities? Is it all porn and Andrew Tate and conspiracy theories, or is there more going on? Peter Hyman, former advisor to Tony Blair and Keir Starmer and former head teacher, has been going out around Britain trying to find out, in the company of Shuab Gamote, a researcher and a writer in his 20s from Manchester. They're both with me now, and what they find out may surprise you. Shuab, can I start with you? This great odyssey, what did you learn that surprised you?
I think the biggest surprise was the difference between the moral panic that we see online and that we saw during our desk research phase and the reality. The moral panic around young people not believing in democracy is simply not true. They do believe in democracy and they want to preserve it, but they're looking for powerful messages that are done correctly. The fact that they're brainwashed by Andrew Tate, simply not true. Every time we mention Andrew Tate's name in a classroom, they laughed us off. They're not. They're aware of some of his messages, but they know the hard reality. This fact that they're brainwashed by the algorithm, they're impacted by it, but they're curious and they're thoughtful and they know what they want and they know what they want to hear, and they'll look for good voices.
This is remarkably cheering. I wasn't expecting a kind of cheerful conversation at this time in the evening. What kinds of things, if you were a politician, what kinds of things should you be thinking about more when you focus on younger people?
Be honest, be direct, cut the BS essentially, and meet them where they are. If you do meet them where they are, you'll see incredible, like what Zach Polanski is doing right now is incredibly interesting. He's got a podcast. He's really active on TikTok. He's bringing on really interesting American names like Hassan Abbey, who's very popular in the left side of American politics. And we need to see something similar like that from, in my personal opinion, from Labour, and just clearly show your values and clearly tell a story.
But there's also an agenda here, because up and down the country, when we talked to young people, they talked about knife crime, and they thought the government wasn't doing enough about it. And that was a symbol, not just about knife crime, but about not having an agenda for young people. So they notice we're talking about the triple lock a lot for those who are older and how we can do the best policies for them. There's very little really aimed at young people in the same way.
And Peter, do they understand that's because they don't vote enough?
Well, and then, so votes at 16 is going to be interesting because at last, politicians, even if in a slightly mercenary way, we now got to take note of them because they've got the vote, we'll have to start thinking about that and properly listening to them.
Peter, I think this kind of Hyman's tour of Britain was your idea. Why did you want to do this? And what? Because, after all, MPs would say, we understand young people. We meet them all the time in our constituencies.
Well, it was the bringing together in a way of being a former head teacher and working with young people for many years and being a political strategist, thinking that we've got this generational thing wrong. Last week we had a curriculum review that didn't do nearly enough to prepare young people for the world they're going to go into.
Do you think?
No, it was a timid affair when we should have had something really radical to prepare them. I've talked about knife crime, there's mental health, there's cost of living, there's first-time buyers of homes. There's a whole set of agendas where young people are not being taken seriously and they want to be taken seriously.
And Shuab, where do you actually meet these people? I mean, how did you organise this? How did you set it up?
I mean, with the school visits, it was quite simple. We wanted to speak to teachers, we wanted to speak to young people, and they were incredibly receptive. At the moment, schools are not having enough of these conversations, and we were so surprised by how much positive feedback that we got after these interviews. And since then, we've been talking to people in London that are creating third spaces for themselves, young people that are sick and tired of the lack of funding for libraries, sick and tired of the lack of funding for youth clubs, and they're creating stuff like board games nights. I mean, I've been to a few, Andrew, and I've spoken to people about it, and it's genuinely incredible what the kind of spaces that they're creating for connection.
But there is a serious point about schools that debate is being either crowded out the curriculum or being shut down. And I know about this from being a head teacher. The worries about safeguarding means if a young man starts talking about anything that seems a bit dodgy to the teachers, it's sort of stamped on. Whereas what we need is the reverse of that. These
open
things
the conversation up.
Open the conversation. So it's not in silos online, but it's in a safe, facilitated environment in school. And there's a really serious point there.
I said at the start, Peter, that you advised Tony Blair back in the day, and you'd advised Keir Starmer more recently. If you come across him again soon, what will you tell him about this journey?
First, it's to have the agenda and a strong message for young people, because substance matters and they realise that. And the second is to get out there and properly listen to them. So it means being abroad a bit less, being at home a bit more, being out and about in the country, and really listening and learning from what young people want.
All right, Shuab, Peter, thank you both very, very much. Really interesting, and it's rare, as I say, that I'm inspired and lifted a little bit by a conversation at this time of night, but I have been just now. Now then, while the Chancellor agonises over tax changes in her attempts to grow the economy, there is one former British diplomat who thinks our best bet for economic success isn't to look here on Earth, but to the stars. We're going to hear from her next, but the time now, 6:48.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
What should the BBC do and what shouldn't the BBC do? That's our 7 o'clock phone-in. Cross-question at 8 and at 9. Skills and Apprenticeships Minister Jackie Smith will be here to take your calls.
Ian Dale at 7. Listen on our free Global Player app or our new LBC app.
At Pets in a Pickle, we're here when it matters most. For fuss-free pet insurance policies as unique as they are. Visit petsinnerpickle.co.uk.
A Thameslink train is a place where you can wind down and catch up. A chance to let conversations flow and plans unfold. And swap doom-scrolling for telling stories. Too good for the group chat. Make the journey part of the joy and save 1/3 with off-peak group tickets at thameslinkrailway.com. Terms apply.
This year,
Amazon are increasing the electric delivery vehicles we use across Europe to 10,000. It's a difference you'll notice on your doorstep, where babies are made a fuss of, where we deliver footballs for kids' kickabouts, and where they deliver the football straight into next door's garden. Can they have their ball back, please? We're delivering change where it matters, on your doorstep. Delivery service partner vehicles across the UK and EU.
Do you know your state pension age? No. Maybe you're not sure, or you don't know how to check. It's so quick and easy to check online. All you need is your date of birth. Knowing your state pension age helps you think about your future. So check yours today. Search state pension age on gov.uk and simply enter your date of birth. State pension age. It's good to know.
Leading Britain's Conversation, LBC, tonight with Andrew Marr.
6:50. Baroness Ashton, Cathy Ashton, has had many distinguished jobs. She was the first European Union High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security. She was a former leader of the Lords as well as an education minister. But now she is looking to the stars, championing Britain's involvement in space. And she joins me now. Cathy, welcome. A lot of people would think, well, it's a little bit airy-fairy, probably in a literal way. It's not going to be a big economic driver.
It's a huge economic driver. 18% of the British economy relies on space. If you think about farming, if you think about energy, if you think about shipping, you think about when we use our phones or we do online banking, all of this requires us to use satellites and to involve ourselves with space.
But I suppose when we use our phones, if we think about it at all, we're happy to rely on Elon Musk and his rockets. We're happy to rely on American or European or even Chinese technology to get us through the farming day or the ordinary working day. Why are we wrong to do that?
Well, first of all, that's to underestimate what we actually do in space. You know, Edinburgh is the place where across Europe more satellites are made, produced, than anywhere else.
Really? Goodness.
Lots of things we didn't know. 1,200 companies working in space. A company I visited in Harwell near Oxford that's working out how to make sure that satellites are capable of getting into space, testing them, a bit like you test washing machines. You know, you shake them, you work out whether they can communicate, but you do it in the vacuum of space that they create. People looking at engineering in space, the ability to make microprocessors, to do semiconductors in space, all of these things are happening here.
So how many people, very roughly, around the UK are involved in space-related work?
It's really hard to know because you've got 60-plus universities, you've got 80 observatories, you've got 1,200 small companies, some big ones too.
Well, already, that's a lot of people.
It is, and you've got a huge amount of, say, the economy that relies on it, and a huge opportunity. We spend 0.05% on space, 1% of the space economy, for which we get a 5% return. So what we're asking government to do is to think strategically now about how we use space.
And as a Glasgow-born boy, I'm very interested in Scotland's role. I think Scotland and Cornwall are the places where it's easiest to set up rockets from. Is that right?
Well, that's right. Saxford, right up in the north of Shetland, is the place that's being developed most with the possibility of polar launch.
Why is that?
So it's polar launch, which means you can take small satellites into space. You can't do the big stuff that you do from the equator, but you can do small satellite launches. And you're able to do it over the sea, which means if something goes wrong, you're not having a problem over urban environments.
And is that why Cornwall has also been looked at?
That's right. And Cornwall was doing a different kind of launch. It was doing a horizontal launch, the idea of taking a rocket up on an aeroplane and then letting it go. Whereas, of course, in Saxford, it's more traditional. So one of the questions we're asking government is, do we want sovereign launch? How are we going to use it? Is it a good investment? How are they going to work out what to do?
So this is thinking big, and it's thinking into the future as well. Rachael Reeves, we know, is trying to protect capital investment in this budget, even if it means breaking Labour's promises and raising income tax. Is this the space offer that you're asking for, is that part of the capital investment that she's talking about?
Well, it's about saying they've already...
Or are you worried that it's not?
Well, they've already committed money through the European Space Agency. Obviously, the collaboration with NASA, with America, and with places like Japan and Australia. The question is how far you see space, something that's about exploration and doing unique and different things, and how far you see it as part of everyday life. We can make pharmaceuticals in space, make drugs for people with serious illnesses that because of the crystallization, the way that it comes together in space will be more effective. We can, as people told us, grow skin in space. We have lots of things we could do that will make life on Earth better and can do it as efficiently as the cost of launch decreases.
So when you're talking about space and being more involved in space, you're really talking about industrial modernisation.
It is about that. It is about people producing things like satellites in Edinburgh. It is about engineering. It is about all of the things that we think of. But it's a recognition too that if you want to support farming, you need to think about space. You need to think how much farmers are using satellites. If you want to support shipping, you need to think about space. So it's not just about producing money for one part of the economy. It's saying this is actually applicable across the whole economy.
I think this is a great cause, Cathy Ashton, which allows me then to say, you've done all these fantastic jobs. Some people are mentioning the US ambassadorship. Would you turn it down?
I don't think at all I'm in the frame for that. They've now put the application form out, and I have certainly not filled one in.
All right. Many people will be disappointed by that, but for now, Baroness Ashton, thank you very, very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you.
And finally, yet more trouble for the government, I'm afraid, over their one-in, one-out migration deal with France, as a second migrant deported under the scheme returns to Britain's shores. LBC's Helen Hodinott is here with the details. Helen.
Andrew, this scheme is supposed to be a deterrent, so it is perhaps slightly concerning for the government that 2 people now, out of the 94 so far sent back to France, have not been deterred. The most recent migrant to have returned to the UK after being deported under the scheme has been detained, with officials saying he was detected upon his re-arrival using biometrics, so things like photographs and fingerprints. So they were immediately alerted that he was one of those who had already been removed. We're told that his case will now be expedited, sent to the front of the queue, and he will once again be sent back to France as quickly as possible. But this is the second time that this has happened. Last Wednesday, an Iranian man was sent back to France, having come back again to the UK last month. He claimed that when he returned to France, he didn't feel safe. He said that he was in a shelter in Paris, afraid to go out, and so made the decision to cross the Channel again. But Downing Street is insisting that this is all evidence of the scheme working, that the detection systems are so good that these 2 were picked up immediately.
Well, I suppose if people are being grabbed, biometrically identified and sent straight back again, this is a problem that should go down. But it's odd, isn't it, that 2 people at least have said that France is so intolerable they can't stay there for more than a couple of days and try to come straight back. I guess there's no sort of penalty for persistence.
No, and this was supposed to be a kind of final solution for migrants who were going to be removed back to France. But of course, what we're finding is that there is essentially nothing stopping them from doing that same route that they came here using the first time, meaning that the scheme perhaps isn't as final as ministers were touting it.
And of course, this is early days for the new Home Secretary, Shuab Gamote, who's promised a much, much tougher regime. And there's big changes to the law coming as well, I think, for the Refugee Convention and for the ECHR.
Well, yeah, at Labour conference in September, Shuab Gamote promised to do whatever it takes to regain control of Britain's borders. She's said to be looking at a shake-up of the UK's immigration laws, looking towards Denmark, which is viewed as having the toughest in Europe. So that is all part of changes that could be coming into place.
Helen Hodinott, thank you very much indeed for that. Now then, a little earlier, I was joined by Rachael Maskell. She's a Labour MP who recently got the whip back after rebelling, and I asked her what the reaction would be on Labour's backbenches if the Chancellor broke the manifesto pledge on raising taxes.
Well, I think there will be much discussion in the Parliamentary Labour Party if the manifesto wasn't adhered to. It's really important that working people who at the moment are stretched to the limit with the cost of living aren't paying more into the system. So we've got to protect them. That's an absolute red line.
I think the Chancellor would have assumed that raising income tax would be popular on the Labour left, but it doesn't seem to be as popular as perhaps she hoped. I think we're going to hear a lot more about this over the next couple of weeks. Anyway, if you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion. You can put your news categories in the order you'd like them, You can pause and rewind live radio, and of course you can listen to a range of podcasts. Download the all-new official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on the LBC, it is Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
Thanks, Andrew. There's a whole lot of hogwash being talked about the BBC at the moment. I'm rather fed up with listening to all these ex-BBC honchos telling us that it's all a vicious right-wing plot to destabilise or destroy the BBC, and it's all down to the awful Robbie Gibb. This is going to be a pundit-free show because I want to ask you a very simple question. What should and shouldn't the BBC do in future? Because that's the question the new Director General is going to have to answer. On Cross Question 8, former Conservative Health Minister Lord Bethell, Green Party MP Sian Berry, broadcaster Matt Stadlen and former MEP Lucy Harris. And at 9, Skills Minister Baroness Jackie Smith joins me for an hour to answer your questions on skills, apprenticeships, further and vocational education and training.